snazzy countdown. Okay, there's 4 people there already. What did everyone think of the snazzy countdown if you got to see it? I will do proper introductions in a minute. I'll just wait till the room fills up, as per usual. 19 people, hello.
Oh boy.
20. And like I say, because we're streaming to multiple platforms. Hello, Laurel. Hello, Pam. This is great. Oh, I love it. Love the tech. But like I say, I am going to make a much longer video that's going to be like an intro thing. And actually, if anyone is, autistic musician, feel free if you want to make like a little jingle for Aucademy. That would be awesome.
Oh, I bet Rob would be interested. Robert, the Autistic Avenger. He does music.
Nice. That would be great. Yeah, I want a jingle. I want something so that I'm not just sitting here being random, waiting for people to turn up. But actually, there's many people here already. Lovely. So Samara, Rachel, Wendy, Jessie, Louise. Hello, lovely people. So I am joined by JayJay, and we will do proper introductions. JayJay, can you see the comments? So you don't.
I can see. Let me see. If I move from private chat to comments, I can. Oh, everybody's saying hello. This is exciting.
Yeah. But then I suggest going back again so that you don't get distracted by them.
Because I will.
So, hello, lovely people. I am Dr. Chloe Farahar, and I am joined today by JayJay. And we are discussing quite a triggering topic. So I'm going to use my very snazzy new service and put my trigger warning up. So we are discussing applied behaviour analysis and basically most modes or any mode of behavioural intervention in attempting to change autistic experience and behaviour and how that can lead to trauma. As usual, we like to start with obviously who our guest is so that people actually know. So as I say, joined by JayJay. So my first question is always, who are you and what is or are your specializations?
So I am JayJay Mudridge. I am an autistic academic tutor, hobbyist, CrossFit athlete, hobbyist off-roader. I run the Facebook page, Not Another Autistic Advocate, where I attempt to dispel cultural myths about autism and autistics. And I'm an applied behavior analysis survivor.
Which is the important topic that we're covering today. And because obviously JayJay and we've had a chat about this topic, and potentially this one is more of a personal perspective, isn't it, for the experiences of ABA, and we might potentially have another session where we were going to look at your sort of education about it, what it is, what it isn't, and potentially what people might want to look at instead. I think. Yeah, okay, lovely. Our next question for our guests is always, when were you discovered autistic? And as a little caveat, I find it quite interesting actually with yourself, JayJay, if you remember, because you were diagnosed quite young.
Very much so.
A lot of the people we have on are not always, but typically later discovered. So when were you discovered autistic?
I was discovered to be autistic around 2.5 or 3, I believe, which is different because I feel like most autistic advocates that are out in the world and producing content like I am have been late discovered into adulthood, whereas I've always known that I was autistic, which lends to a different set of problems.
How was it actually explained to you, if at all?
I don't think it was ever sat down and explained to me, but my personal experience with always understanding that I was autistic, my entire childhood was saturated with pathology paradigms, to use Dr. Nick Walker's terms, rather than neurodiversity paradigms. It was always that autism is a a deficit. It's something is incorrect with you that needs to be corrected. It was very much unaccepting of autism. Autism is an incorrect modality of existence.
And obviously we're going to talk about sort of growing up, ABA, all that kind of thing. Is it because you say it wasn't necessarily explained to you, and then everything around you, the narrative was all pathology? So for people who maybe don't hear this word all the time, or you're not too sure, pathology usually means disease, right? And that's really a misnomer when we're talking about neurology. You can't actually talk about neurology as a disease, so the pathology paradigm is quite problematic in that sense. But is it fair to say, because it was the case that you were non-speaking, so
yes.
you know, do you feel that maybe it also wasn't explained to you because you were non-speaking?
Many things were not explained to me when I was non-speaking. So I was non-speaking until about the age of 12-ish. And it definitely wasn't that I didn't understand language. I would like bring poetry to my caretakers to try to communicate. So poetry that I had read, which is poetry is one of my special interests. So it was not the case that I didn't understand language, but it was very much so made out that I was intellectually disabled, didn't understand language, didn't understand other people, when in actuality it was that I did not have the motor skills, the fine motor skills that it takes to make locutionary utterance and speech sounds.
So basically that emphasis or the misunderstanding that to understand, like for you to be able to understand anything or to be able to communicate, there was that expectation to use mouth words, basically.
Right. Yes, very much so. And that was one of that was a large emphasis of the ABA that I was in for a while, was, you know, get JayJay to use mouth words, which is unnecessary and problematic for reasons I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look, because we, like I said, we put some questions together when we had a chat before. So before we get into the ABA and things, I guess because you just obviously spoke a bit about the issue of the pathology and way of looking at autism that way. So for you, how do you understand being autistic, or what does being autistic mean to you?
I understand autism as a different modality of existence. I mean, I don't consider it to be incorrect. I mean, obviously, but like so many people say like autistic people and normal people, but any argument that is based in the premise that, you know, normal is good, normal in this case being neurotypical, is a fallacious argument, because whether it is normal or not is not based on whether it is, you know, moral, right, or preferable. So autism, I'm fond of saying autism is the richness through which I experience the world. Just because I see and hear and everything, because my iteration of autism comes along with visual and auditory hyperacuity. My brain doesn't filter out all of the minutia around me, so I see all of the details with all of the intensity.
Lovely, yeah. And I guess that, because one of the things whenever I'm delivering training, it doesn't matter who the audience is or what they're asking about in relation to what they want to learn about autistic experience, what element, I always put in the autistic definition of what autism is, because it's very different and almost flipped the DSM or the diagnostic manuals on their head. So it's like to start from the fact that we process sensory information differently, and then how, if we're processing all sensory information differently, how that will impact your communication, your thinking, your motor skills, you know, how you think and move and interact in the world. Okay, because that's interesting in terms of that's how you see it as well, that hyper acuity. Nice. Okay, so into the meaty topic then. So what is ABA and what is your perception on it? So particularly if we've got any new people who don't know what that is.
So applied behavior analysis is marketed as the gold standard of autism therapies, but autistics and ourselves, and particularly the people who have been through it, like myself, consider it an egregious form of abuse. Much of ABA is rooted in trying to change autistic neurology, autistic behavior, to normalize the autistic experience. And in fact, the person who pioneered ABA, Ivar Lovaas, the stated intent was to make autistic individuals indistinguishable from their peers. And we all know how unacceptable of a goal that is, because the neurotypicals are just so fond of being like, well, you should be yourself, but as soon as your hands start flapping, or as soon as you don't or can't use verbal vocal speech, or realistically, as soon as you start behaving autistically, noticeably autistically, it's, oh, I meant be yourself, but not like that. It's very much meant to normalize autistic behaviors, as ABAers would call them, but they're just autistic traits.
And how do ABAs, applied behavioural analysis, as a process, or as a method, or as a school of thought, or how would it be described by people who practice it?
I really try not to interact with people who practice it these days.
I guess the reason I'm asking it that way is, like I say, in case people haven't come across it before, okay, so and
they will often say like, oh, we're trying to teach autistics emotional regulation. We're trying to, redirect harmful stims to help this person fit in. We want to, help them use verbal vocal speech. We want to help, just them be the best version of themselves. But it's all double talk. The best version of an autistic in their minds is one who passes as neurotypical.
And what's wrong with that? I'm playing devil advocate, by the way.
Of course.
Obviously, I want to be quite clear as well for anyone who's watching, as a platform, Aucademy just does not agree on ABA, on anything that tries to change autistic people to be non-autistic. So I am just playing devil's advocate here. Yes.
So what's wrong with that is that it leads to autistic masking, and autistic masking leads to burnout, which leads to autistic suicide. So when you have these children in these therapies that force them to mask for the arbitrary comfort of others, and that's what it is. It's for the arbitrary comfort of others. I don't want someone giving, my kid the side eye in the grocery store because they flapped their hands because they happily found a candy bar that they liked. Oh no, someone gave them a weird look. It takes, so here's what my mask looks like in casual conversation, and just interacting with someone that I know is not autistic and trying to. This is the narrative, the script that goes through my head. My husband is here just laughing. Say hi, darling. What have you done? Say hi to all of the people on the internet that are.
That was way too much lotion.
My husband has used too much lotion. So my masking conversation, even just, neurotypicals talking about the weather, greeting someone, smile, make eye contact, make sure that your facial expressions are matching your words, which is then in turn matching your tone. Direct the conversation towards them. Don't use too many personal anecdotes. Don't flap your hands. Don't rock. Don't spin. Don't look towards that sound. What does that facial expression mean? No, wait, you can't ask that. That's uncouth. And this is just the narrative that's going through my head all the time. And it's not for any other reason than I want to be accepted. So imagine if that was going through your head all the time at all points. You would be exhausted. I call them social hangovers, but what they are is burnout, because I can only hang out with, I feel like I can only spend time with groups of, 2 or 3 more people, because I always have to keep this up to make sure that I'm not socially ostracized, because when the mask drops, I am. Autistic masking isn't deception, it's a survival strategy. That being said, it's a survival strategy that slowly kills us, because it is linked to autistic suicide. Because we don't have the cognitive bandwidth for doing anything else. Before I unmasked, I would come home from work, from teaching, and I would be so exhausted from masking all day long for the arbitrary comfort of others who rejected me anyways. I wouldn't have time to walk, or time or energy or spoons to walk my dogs, to do my dishes, to clean my house, to do my laundry, to do all of the other things that non-disabled people consider non-activities that don't take time or cognitive.
And I think the problem as well that I have, apart from the obvious, which is that I do consider it basically a traumatic device, is that I teach so access course students. So these are students that want to get into university, but they haven't got the A levels, for instance. So A levels in the UK. So they're trying to, get the grades to be able to go to university. And so a lot of them are kind of mature students. And I'm teaching them the basics of psychology. And we pick apart as part of the course, because you have to, as part of the curriculum, the issues with or the criticism of behavioural psychology as a discipline. So we're not even necessarily talking about ABA per se, but the issue with just focusing on observable behaviours means you are completely ignoring the cognitive things that are going on the inside, how that person feels, just focusing on the behaviours. Like you say, if that's all they're doing in ABA is focusing on, we don't like that behaviour, we want to change that behaviour, and we're going to do that via things like reward and punishment and all that kind of thing. So again, you will be better placed to be able to tell me about other potential so-called tools that they might use in an ABA intervention. But my students get that. They're like, well, yeah, you're just focusing on behaviours. What about what the person feels like on the inside? And why are they doing those behaviours in the first place? What are they communicating? It's too superficial to focus on the behaviour.
And ABA entirely ignores the fact that autistic individuals have very real neurobiological differences. ABA, to me, seems to view autism as a set of arbitrary behaviors without the reasons behind them. So one thing I often liken it to is if you took someone to the doctor because they had a broken arm, and you taught them not to cry and smile through the pain, and rewarded them when they weren't crying, and rewarded them when you poked it and they didn't say ouch, their arm is still broken. They're just not showing it. And that very much seems like an apt analogy for ABA, because so many, like one of the things that happens is ABA is a lot of they try to do desensitization. I particularly remember that I got a lot of that because I am a sensory avoidant autist. I'm noise canceling headphones and sunglasses year round when I'm out in public. They would try to expose you to this stimuli, rooted in well, if they get used to it, they'll be fine, and then they'll be used to it. But us autistics experience unpleasant sensory stimuli as pain. And I mean, at this age, I can articulate where I'm feeling it in my body and how I'm experiencing that pain. But all you're doing is causing us to dissociate from our bodies, because you're just putting us in constant pain. At least I personally experience my sensory distress as pain, and many of the other autists I
And I think it's just based on absolutely flawed assumptions that by changing behaviour, or like we're talking about, really all you're doing is hiding, or that person ends up hiding that behaviour. It's not that those needs disappear to move in certain ways, and echolalia, all those kinds of things. So for those in the comment section, echolalia is the repetition of words or sounds or phrases that feel good or regulate or help you sort of sensory regulation and so on. I lost my train of thought. I do that all the time. Anyway, focusing on behaviour, suppressing that behaviour really cannot change neurology. We are born autistic, although I always have to be with my caveat that at this point in time, we can't see autism in the sense of we haven't got definitive biogenetic markers and so on.
Not markers, but there are like things like, don't we have like thicker neuronal branching, and we do less, synaptic pruning than others, which is why we're able to pick up something.
So there's differences, and I guess the point is that those differences aren't necessarily uniform, because there's no such thing as uniform brains, because that would not make any evolutionary sense.
Right.
Different from one another, and it's also very difficult to know. It's always that cause and effect thing. Is it that the autism in quotation marks causes that difference in, like, say, synaptic pruning and so on, or is it the synaptic pruning that causes autism? Like, we can never know those sort of. And to be honest, it doesn't matter. We're still here.
Exactly. Yes.
It's kind of a moot point. The point is, I've said this before as well on other lives, which is, I just don't find it as a researcher scientifically interesting to know where autism is in our brains, DNA and bodies. We're here. We need to know scientifically with research how to actually improve our lives. I find that much more beneficial.
Right. And so much of autism research is like there are autistics out there screaming from the hilltops, like, can your autism research be like why so many of us have these horrific gastrointestinal problems, why caffeine works for some of us in one way and others in a different way. Can we talk about like why, XYZ, like, can we get to the root of our sensory differences and our attention differences? But they're like, no, I think we'll just figure out how to eradicate you.
Yeah. Why do you exist? And it's like,
why do you exist? Like,
it doesn't matter. And I've kind of gone off on a weird tangent, but
no,
it doesn't matter as well, in the sense of, even if we were able to find the gene, the biogenetic marker for autism, that still does not indicate that you have found disorder, because you can find the genes for why I have the eye color that I have, why I have the nose that I have. Finding biogenetic markers does not indicate you found disorder, because the only thing that really decides or dictates whether it's disorder is society.
Absolutely. The social model of disability is.
So if you find those markers, all you've done is find autism, right? You haven't found disorder, though. Anyway, I've gone off on a weird tangent.
There's also the fact that, like, if autism wasn't beneficial in some way, it would have been, it would have evolved out of the gene pool millennia ago. Like,
and people don't understand. One of the quotes that I used in a terrible play that I wrote, that actually became the basis of my PhD. So I wrote it in 2012. And one of the quotes is, if allowed to, us humans could genetically eradicate. Oh, no, wait. Oh, no, I'm going to forget the quote. We just don't know what we would end up losing, basically, if we kept or had the ability to keep messing about with the genetic material of human beings.
Absolutely.
But I've gone off on a tangent. My point was, which was, if you change behaviour, the outward expression of behaviour, you still haven't changed neurology. So it's kind of just a losing battle. It is actually, whether people think it or not, much easier to change the environment.
Absolutely.
So you can't change. I think it's actually quite it's quite not obnoxious, what's the word I want, arrogant to think,
which is also obnoxious. Arrogance is obnoxious, so you're good.
Yeah. But it's quite arrogant to have people think that they can basically torture you into literally becoming a whole different human being.
Absolutely.
Changing your neurology. It's gone off on a very weird tangent, way away from any of my questions. Let's get back to the questions, because this might help with a bit of structure. So we we kind of went around the houses about what ABA is and what's our perceptions on it. It's negative. That's quite the end. Don't do it.
Yeah, that's really the long and short of it.
But for yourself, when were you put through ABA, and how long were you subjected to it?
I don't remember exactly when it started, because I feel like it started before I had like solidifying memories. So I believe it was around 4 or 5, and I was in it until in varying degrees until I was
until you were how old? Sorry,
about 14.
About 14.
It was like, I mean, before you're going to ABA instead of regular school, and then like the ABA you in school all the way through. Pretty much my first year of high school. Yeah.
And how did you experience it? So basically, what did you have to do, and what was expected of you?
Oh my god. So it varied, but like there are a couple anecdotes that I can share that really underscore the intent and what happens in ABA. So there were times like I would be like, loud unexpected noises are a problem for me. Auditory clutter is a problem for me, as they are for many autistics. And I remember being a kid and like having them turn on very loud music, or loud TVs or whatever, or depending, as I got older and could articulate that it was visual clutter, not necessarily volume, that was then like loud, several going at once, and they would hold my hands in my lap. So like I would cover my ears and I would scream because it's terrible. And I mean, I was a child, and they would hold your hands in your lap, and they would time how long it takes you to scream or cry or whatever, and they would try to push that period back with the timer. I have a profound avoidance for timers. At any point, I have a visceral panic reaction to timers or being timed at it to this day. And they would, give you literal rewards for pushing that time back, whether that's like, here's a single marshmallow out of Lucky Charms cereal, or like, oh, good girl, like you're a dog, or as if I'm a girl. So there was also things like, so I have a profound I'm trying to think of like, I hate viscous textures in my mouth, and like I wasn't very good at brushing my teeth because it's a terrible sensory feel. I still dry heave my way through it at age 31 years old. I just able to do it. But they would like put viscous things like maple syrup or honey on a toothbrush and put it in my mouth, and then time how long it took for me to like vomit or dry heave or start crying, and then push that time back. So a lot of it was trying to desensitize me to these things, or tell themselves that it was related to desensitization. And like brushing my teeth, I experienced that as physical pain. I experienced loud sounds, auditory clutter, as physical pain. If you were taking a child and putting them through physical pain, the neurotypical child, we would call that abuse.
Yeah.
But because I'm autistic, your therapy is covered by insurance. Your abuse is covered by insurance and called therapy. There were times, so the first time I tried to come out as transmasculine, as a non-binary person, around age must have been 13 or 14, and I didn't really have the words for it at that time. Gender appropriate behavior was put on my behavior plan, my point sheet, we would call it in high school, the high school I went to. And I would lose points for acting in perceived masculine ways or talking in perceived masculine ways. Or like also like, so throughout my entire education, we had point sheets. Like you can earn up to 3 points. And if you get X amount of points in a day, you're on level green. And if you lose X amount of points, you're on yellow or red. And red is obviously the most restrictions. You can't go on field trips. You can't leave your seat, blah, blah, blah. And it was always stuff like, responds appropriate to sensory stimuli, accepts staff directions without arguing or on the first try. And a lot of it was like redirecting or trying to suppress my stims. Quiet hands was used a lot because I have very, very flappy hands. Very flappy hands. And the thing is, I have a flap for every emotion. I have a frustrated flap. I have like a coy flirting flap. I have a frightened flap. I have a very happy flap. I have a neutral flap. Like it's always happening. And you can tell my emotions by what my hands are doing, where they're positioned in relation to the rest of my body, whether it's front to back or side to side, what my finger position is. And if you know me, you can tell the minutia of my flaps and what I'm feeling, even if my face isn't showing it.
And that's the whole thing as well, which is the frustration of, it is the double empathy problem that non-autistic people cannot perspective take and understand that behavior. And although not all behavior is intentional communication, it can be information.
Absolutely.
So like you said, it might be, I've definitely had that with autistic people that I support, where I will notice, particularly those that I've just met, if they're new to me and they're doing a tiny little movement, but the rest of them is dead still and neutral, I pick up on that and oh, they've not met me before. They're probably anxious, have something to fiddle with, and let's focus on that and not each other and things like that. And so it's really misunderstanding the information that, like you say, those different modes of hand movement might be actually conveying.
And there's a thing, like one of the arguments, pro or neutral ABA arguments I hear, especially on my page, not another autistic advocate, a lot is like, oh, new ABA isn't like that. We don't suppress stims, we don't redirect stims, blah, 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 or we only redirect stims. That being said, when you redirect a stim, you could be missing what they're trying to communicate, because all of our stims, whether or not they're intentional communication, like Chloe had said, they are information. And if you redirect a stim to something you consider less noticeable, that will make you stand out less or is less embarrassing, you could very well miss what we're trying to communicate. Also, like, if my foot itches and you tell me not to take off my shoe to itch it and instead itch my ear, my foot still itches. But ABA still is very much like that. So like when like quiet hands, I would get praise and rewards and hugs and so on and so forth if I had quiet hands, and if I didn't, I would be ignored or denied food or so on and so forth. And just because ABA doesn't slap you or electrocute you, depending on where you are, anymore, doesn't mean that it's not using different means to get to the same end, which is to disguise autistic neurology for the arbitrary comfort of neuromajorities.
And it's quite interesting. I'm not going to necessarily pop the comment on the screen, but somebody making a comment about when you are autistic, you need to be social, and they need to use social interaction by talking to people. And it's kind of like, but I think what's frustrating is that non-autistic people don't understand that we have our own way of being social.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's not to force us into that non-autistic mode of sociality, of communication. This is what I'm saying. If I would never invite non-autistic people into our autistic spaces that we have. So we have a number of autistic spaces and they wouldn't be this, it's not appropriate for them to be there, but it would be interesting for them to see it, because you've got a bunch of autistic people who actually are quite happy to be around other autistic people. And a lot of the time it's online at the moment. That's fine. But they don't understand that we have such different modes of interaction. And we've got situationally mute people. We've got people who just use the chat box. We've got one autistic student. I don't think I've ever seen them with their camera on. So I don't know what they look like. They've never used their microphone, and they never use the chat box. To me, they are still participating.
Absolutely, because they're there. And they're
there.
And like, that being said, like, I've had interactions with other autistic people where, like, so like one of my special interests is the X-Files, and I have an autistic friend whose special interest at the time was the play, what's it called? Hamilton. And we were talking, and I was talking about the X-Files, and then she was relating something back to, well, like, oh, this, and this that happened on the X-Files, where it's like this, that, and the other thing. And she would be like, oh, well, that, you know, something like this reminds me of something about Hamilton. And we went like that for several hours. And we have a neurotypical friend who was just kind of sitting there aghast with their mouth open and is like, you're having two different conversations. And like, no, we're not. We are weaving our specializations together into this one web of joy. Look at how excited we both are. Like, we're not ignoring or talking over each other. We're not miscommunicating. We are weaving what we like together into this synergistic conversation. And it's funny because, again, Milton's double empathy problem, and all of the research that confirms that backs Milton's double empathy problem is very, very real. On my page a lot, and in, you know, some of the groups I'm on that are for like neurotypical parents, come ask us about your children because we were your children. It's like, well, I feel like I'll get comments that are like, well, I feel like this isn't a safe space for me because everybody's so aggressive in their communication and everything they're saying is, it feels like bullying. I feel ostracized here. And I'm like, well, this is how autistics feel all the time. So I need you to sit with these feelings and understand that this is how we feel in every social interaction, in every space. What you're feeling right now is how we feel all the time. And we have the different.
Also misrepresenting the way that we communicate sometimes as aggression when it's not.
Direct. It's direct.
I can tell if I'm around autistic people if they're angry, but I can also tell if they're just being direct, and there's no malice, there's nothing like that. And I've used the example before that of me talking to one of the autistic students, and I was just talking with them, and then they kind of cut me off and just said, I'm really tired, I'm going home. Turned around, walked and went home. And I checked with them the next time I saw them that I hadn't said anything to upset them. And they were like, no, just tired. And I didn't take it personally. It was literally, that wasn't about me. Their need at that point in time was, I can't do this conversation anymore. Let the person know I'm going home. Right?
Yeah.
There's no rudeness in that. And I just, obviously because I am autistic, but I prefer autistic communication.
I do, very much so. Because I feel like neurotypical communication, it's polite to be indirect and hint at things. And like, I'm perceived as rude often because I ask for what I need, or I tell people how I expect to be treated. And I mean, that comes across as aggressive and uncouth, but it's because neurotypical communication is indirect, and it's this little dance that they're so used to indirect communication that directness feels like aggression to them.
And we haven't got the time or the energy for that dancing around and working out.
And also, like, so much of our socialization is we don't read inferences. I don't pick up on social hints. Like, people, like, I get invited to my pole dancing studio does, like, the Friday class often goes out to like sushi at night, and every time's like, everybody's invited, and I'm like, okay, great, guys, have fun. And they're like, no, you're part of everybody. And I'm like, I just don't pick up on the inferences. I'm not really great at reading social subtext, and so I don't know how I'm supposed to also give social subtext if that makes sense. Not only do I not read it, I'm unable to give it. And I find that neurotypicals often ascribe intentions to what I'm saying, either my tone, my facial expression, and think I'm being rude or implying something I'm not. And that just leaves me confused and upset. Like,
And I've said this before as well, that you know, autistic friendship as well, communication, it does look different. Like, you know, I had Si and Jess, who were behind the scenes with Aucademy. They came round, hadn't seen anybody for months, you know, and Jess kind of tentatively was like, is it okay if I bring my Switch and my pajamas and things? I was like, absolutely, bring whatever you need, because you're going to be here for a couple of hours. We're going to chill, we're going to hang out, you know. And so some of that time was just her on her Switch, me doing whatever I was doing. So I got really, really tired and had a nap. You know, that's, to non-autistic people, that would be rude. And it's like, that is just autistic friendship. And
right. And I love parallel play. So this is another thing that ABA tries to correct is parallel play and incorrect play. But like, the thing is, like, parallel play is so intimate. It's so, there's so much connection there. Like, I'm existing with you in the way you need me to exist with you right now. I'm accepting all of you in the way you are and all of your needs and what you need right now. My favorite thing is, like, to be able to, you know, text someone, I'm lonely. Do you want to come over and, you know, do your work here? We can just hang out and do our different things together. And I feel like that's definitely one of the things that ABA tries to correct is parallel play. They see it as not being engaged with the other person because I'm doing, you know, this. I'm, you know, fidgeting with my spinner and, you know, staring off at the brownie.
Yeah, I've got I'm doing this the whole time. I've got this here.
And I mean, this is one of the keys to unmasking is committing to the stim. Where it's like I'm doing whatever I'm doing, and, you know, my friend is doing whatever they're doing, and we're doing it together. And ABA is like, no, that's wrong. That's the wrong way to connect with people. But, like, is it? Because I'm accepting everything my friend needs right now and giving them what they need too.
And it's lovely.
It's synergy. It really is.
Yeah. We're only in like 2 of my questions. Okay. Okay, so because that part of the question was, how did you experience it? So basically, what kinds of things? So you've given some examples, and I mean, with the toothbrush and the toothpaste thing. So, you know, you were diagnosed, like, say, what age was it? Sorry,
like 2.5.
Yeah, so quite young. Whereas I was diagnosed at 32, so I didn't know until I was 32. I knew I was different, just, you know, and I should have been picked up as a child, but that's a whole other conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now. So that whole idea that you can desensitize an autistic person when we already experience all sensory information differently, and it will be dependent on your own, you know, profile. And I just think I have to buy really, really small toothbrush heads because I have got such a sensitive gag reflex. I've always had that. You cannot desensitize me to that. You know, I've asked to have my uvula shortened or removed. That's the little bell at the back of the throat, if people aren't too sure.
Because I've always punching bag in comic books or cartoons.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I asked for that before I knew I was autistic. And then when I knew I was autistic, I realized why I was so sensitive to it, and things like that. You can't, I'm 37. If I haven't been able to desensitize to that in 37 years, how is very, very sort of traumatizing ways of trying to desensitize, that all you're going to do is make that person hide that, like you said, like the masking. And the note I've got here is as well was that we talked about, it wasn't necessarily about getting you to speak, but per se, because you say you didn't really speak until you were 11
or 12.
11 or 12, but this complete attempt to normalize.
Absolutely.
That's the note that I had there. So I don't know if you kind of covered that, or if there was a bit more you wanted to say on that.
I mean, I covered a little bit with the anecdotes that I gave, but it was all very much like teaching me how to play with my toys, because I was very much one of the kids that like lines everything up and color codes everything, and I do that to this day. Like, one of my favorite things is like looking at other people's color-coded notebooks on the internet. I call it productivity porn, but like that's okay when you're an adult, but when you're a kid, like if you just spin the wheel of the toy vehicle and watch all of the treads in the tire make these stimmy patterns and get engulfed in that, that's playing with it wrong because you're not rolling it around and going vroom vroom. So it was trying to even correct the way I played with things. I was also heavily medicated, not necessarily in ABA, but because when I was a child, they thought I was. My parents were under the impression I was mentally ill. I was for these reasons. So like I was scared to go outside when I was a kid, and they didn't understand the reasons, and then I couldn't communicate to them in ways that they would accept. That it's just overwhelming to me. I mean, and I love the outdoors now, but it's like when I look down at the grass, I'm not just seeing, oh, this is the lawn. I see every individual blade of grass. I see the 7 different colors that the sun has made it. I see the spots on it. I see an ant crawling through the grass, and the minutia of the movements of the grass when the ant's antenna brushes it, and it's just all this really beautiful and also profoundly overwhelming experience. And that's not mental illness. That's mental clarity.
And you kind of alluded to it right at the beginning, which was you were trying to communicate with them.
Oh, very much so.
Showing them poems and things that meant something to you.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, that's why it's frustrating, this focus on communicating in that non-autistic, very narrow way. And this argument as well that we don't have, communicative non-verbal cues or behaviors either, and it's like we do, you just don't know them, you just don't read them the way that another autistic person will.
And it strikes me as a little bit hypocritical because neurotypicals have this hyper emphasis on nonverbal communication anyways, like body language and your tone of voice and your facial expressions, and they're like, oh, so much of communication is nonverbal, until someone's actually non-speaking, and then it's the only correct means of communication. We have to get this child to speak. It strikes me as profoundly hypocritical. But yeah, I would anything is communication, man, but neurotypicals don't, and I don't want to generalize, but I feel like I have to put this disclaimer out there. I don't want to generalize. I'm sure there are good neurotypicals, just like I'm sure there were good 13th century rats. But like, you just have to attune yourself to differences. So when autistics ask to be accommodated, and I think I talked a little bit with this on the Autistic Mental Health and Wellbeing Conference, I did a couple, or last weekend, that like we're not asking for much when we are asking to be accommodated. Like the fact of the matter is it's hard for neurotypicals to accommodate us because that would mean reorienting the way they view autism. It would take adopting an entirely new paradigm. And it strikes me as, I don't know if it's a neurotypical thing or just, being a human thing, that like admitting that they're wrong about something and then integrating the new information into their behavior and moving forward. It seems like they find it to be a personal insult being wrong, but it just means you're not informed.
I think it's also that ironic, well, it is very ironic that it's because they don't like change and they have a rigidity of thinking. They don't
want for hours about this. Yes.
Right. So, not wanting to change. And I talked about this with permission, and it was anonymized, sat in on an EHCP meeting a few weeks back. So I can't remember what you might call them in America. That's an education, health and care plan. So it's, what you would try to put in place for a disabled pupil, child.
So like an IEP.
What is it, sorry?
Like an IEP?
Which
an
is
individualized education plan, like all the accommodations and what teachers.
There you go. Yeah. So it's the same sort of thing. And so autistic mum with autistic child. So autistic mum, me, they're in the capacity of I know about autism. an autistic SEND, so special education need, an EHCP advocate who's also autistic, and another only very recently recognised or autistic person as well. But 4 of us in this meeting with the neurotypical sort of teachers and what have you. And when we were saying, why are a lot of the goals here in this plan for this young disabled person who's really struggling, why is it about them working out? Some of it was literally about them trying to work out the hidden meaning of other people's communication. It wasn't worded that way, but it was basically that. And we were like, where is the environment? Where are the children around that child and the teachers learning that child's mode of communication and so on? And just this really angry, I can't remember what he was like a lead autism something or other for the school. And he was just really angry. And he's like, are you really expecting us to change the environment and the world around? And I was like, yes.
Yes,
and
I
he
am.
was so indignant at this idea. And this is where I get to that point of, but what you're actually asking is not possible. You're asking to change the child who was born with a different neurology. It is actually easier to change the world around the child who's disabled.
Very much. And that's so it's like we aren't asking anything of neurotypicals that they haven't asked for us from the second we are born. It's one of my biggest pet peeves is like, you expect us to accommodate you to the point of our mental exhaustion and eventual suicide. But when we ask for, could you please dim the lights? Could I wear my noise canceling headphones to this event? I'm going to wear my sunglasses inside. Oh no, like what an incredibly uncouth and awful thing for you to ask. That will be weird. We aren't asking anything from neurotypicals that they don't ask of us. And again, Milton's double empathy problem.
And somebody's made the point that I've made before, lots of people will be making all the world over. So they're an educator. They're saying it's especially frustrating because so many accommodations, in quotation marks, would also create better learning environments for all students. And I think we say this all the time, that I think it just sounds like a soundbite that doesn't mean anything anymore. But it genuinely will. Allowing people to learn a different language, the autistic language, would actually enrich those other children's understanding of the world.
So I was a teacher for a very brief period of time. So I was a professor for a while, and then I taught kindergarten and first grade as well briefly before I was ousted for my autistic neurology. And I made it a point to make my classrooms very sensory friendly. We didn't have the lights on, or we had the lights very dim. Soft music playing in the background. It was very quiet. Students could eat at any point that they wanted to, as long as they were respectful about it and cleaned up after themselves. Students could get up and move around. Everybody had like a chair that would jiggle. Everybody had access to the rocking chair and the sensory box. And most of my students were neurotypical. None of them were harmed by me making my classroom a neurodivergent friendly environment. In fact, they were enriched by it. When Chris Bonellos spoke about a comic strip he saw at the Autistic Mental Health and Wellbeing Conference with Aucademy the other week, where it was like a one-panel comic or whatever. He said of a school janitor like shoveling off the school steps, and there was also a ramp, and there was a wheelchair user being like, hey, but if you shoveled off the ramp, everybody could still get up. And then it was like, well, we can't just accommodate you by shoveling the ramp. And he's like, everybody can walk up the ramp. So when we make society accessible to disabled individuals, to autistic individuals, we're not making it inaccessible to neuromajorities. I mean, I have friends. I had a conversation with someone from my CrossFit box the other day. I was talking about, I don't go to the grocery store. It's terrible for me. I avoid it at all costs. And she was like, yeah, man, I'm not autistic and I hate going to the grocery store. It's too bright. It's too loud. And I'm like, yes, imagine.
I'm just going to grab, because I don't want to lose them. So there's a few comments and questions that might be quite useful.
I also haven't been reading the comments because I know that.
No, don't worry, because there's loads and there's people just chatting to one another. Where are we? Sorry, I just want to grab it. Right, I'm going to grab that one. I'm just going to leave it on the screen though, and come back to it because I don't want to lose it, because there's so many comments and questions.
What about stims where significant physical harm is caused, e.g. punching throat? What are the best supports? Those are not stims. That is self-harm. That is an example of trauma in anybody, not just in autistic individuals. Like, if anybody is punching themselves in the throat, you need to get to the root of what is causing them to punch themselves in the throat and eradicate it immediately. To equate or to conflate self-harm with a stim is so profoundly misguided and so profoundly harmful. That's the fact that you're even thinking about stims in this capacity and relating it to a stim is so concerning for me.
I mean, yeah, I guess it depends on what it is, what's causing it and so on, and picking apart, is it a psychological response or is it a need for regulation that went too far? Because I do train on the fact that, like therapists, for instance, they conflate self-harm, which is
right,
more of a psychological mechanism, with harmful stims, where the stim was means to regulate, but it's gone too far.
Right.
So like
a
head
lot
banging and things.
So like dermatillomania is a stim that can also be psychological. And like I always say, for something like that, like for me when I was skin picking, peeling off the skin felt profoundly satisfying. You dip your hands in glue, man, and peel that. Like there's you need to figure out what need is not being met and start meeting that need. And if it's a sensory thing, if it's something like pressure on the throat or something, like there are things you can acquire. Like if someone needs pressure on their throat like that, you can wear a choker necklace very tight. You can wear turtlenecks. Like but it is my instinct to say that is a psychological need that's not being met. That is an expression of distress and trauma. So for me, like I said, like when I was a child and I was experiencing sensory stimuli that were injuring me, I would often, I was a headbanger. I would smash my head against walls. And it wasn't just frustration that I couldn't communicate in ways that like nobody wanted to read the poetry that I was giving them and interpret the poetry that I was giving them. But also like the environment is too bright, the environment is too loud, I need to escape. I'm going to smash my head against the wall to distract me from that. Had people dim the lights and realized the problem and tried to investigate it rather than like, oh, JayJay is a crazy person, I wouldn't have been punching myself in the head or hitting my head against the walls. And if you like stop thinking about this as a stim and start thinking about it as an expression of trauma and severe distress in anybody, neurotypical or not. If a neurotypical was self-harming by cutting their wrists or their thighs, you wouldn't call it a stim. But because they're autistic, this experience of distress is somehow related to their neurology.
And I think to make clear as well, so like what I was just trying to explain, that there is definitely a difference between self-harm or self-injurious behaviour in that sense and a harmful stim. So because we would have adults that we support who we would check because they would say, I'm doing this thing, I don't actually want to be doing this, but right. there was like a regulatory need to do something, and I'm being vague on purpose because obviously I don't want to say anything to where we've got people in the comment section, and so it was about, okay, well, what's happening? Why is it that you can't regulate in a much more or less harmful way, and what can we do to either change the environment, change and redirect that stim as well, because those would have been stims. I think it's quite a difficult one, particularly if they are quite young and they can't articulate
what's going on. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So definitely, like, one thing that I do, like, so I have a lot of like gastrointestinal issues, as I'm not part of my autism, but like co-occurring with it, and like I used to punch myself in the stomach or not eat, and those were viewed as, you know, self-harm behaviors, but the root of it was I ate this and my stomach hurts, so I'm trying to, you know, like bite my arms to take away from the pain in my stomach, or, you know, pardon my French, but, you know, I had dairy and now I haven't shat in 3 days, and like nobody, you have to process of elimination, man.
Just in a couple of other things as well here. So this one, I'm going to go with gentle educating here. I'm hoping that the person wasn't, you know, trying to claim that to be autistic means that we have damaged brains, because the problem with this kind of thing, so the comment is neurology changes over time. Yes, it does. To some extent, there will be some plasticity to a person's neurology. Yes, this is why people can get speech, occupational and physical therapy for strokes, for instance, not just being autistic. Sometimes we can wire around the damage. Ooh. The problem there is autistic brains are not damaged. And so Nick Walker's point, which I loved, and I memeified it with her permission and you know, shared it, which is you cannot unqueer neuroqueer brains. Mm-hmm. Attempts to unqueer, i.e. make us appear normal, all you're doing is making those brains more queer, i.e. you're giving an autistic person trauma responses. You might end up with an autistic person with psychosis because you tried to unqueer their neurology to make it normal, i.e. via ABA. So to be clear, I'm going to take that comment off now, but we are not damaged.
In any capacity. You are further damaging us, not only by considering our brains to be damaged and comparing autistic neurology to brain damage, but by trying to normalize it, you are further causing us. So like I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder from my time in ABA. You have further damaged me by subjecting me to normalization therapies that only causes trauma.
Yeah. So you were already neuroqueer, and it sadly made you more neuroqueer, because you cannot unqueer queer, which I love as Nick Walker's phrase. I was just like, it's beautiful. I have to memify that. And that kind of brings us to the point, or one of the questions, which is there a lasting impact, and what is it, and the trauma? So you've just explained, you know, what did you say? Complex PTSD.
Complex PTSD. So I don't know if you're familiar with the differences between. Well, I'm sure you are. But
always just assume that I'm ignorant, because it kind of helps if people haven't heard the phrases before. So don't worry.
That's often what I would tell my students when they're writing. Like, you need to. I know that you know, and I know that I know, but we need to assume that the reader of this essay or whatever you're doing knows nothing about any of this, and you need to explain it. So, going off of that. Post-traumatic stress disorder is usually caused by one sort of trauma, one or two traumatic events, like a rape or combat. Complex post-traumatic stress is caused by layers of trauma over time, like child abuse, being held in captivity, and it literally changes your brain chemistry because it happens in the developmental years. Often PTSD can, I don't want to say overcome, because like I just hate that in terms of disabilities so much, but it can be learned to live alongside, and it can be integrated, whereas CPTSD in many cases is harder to treat, harder to integrate. So my trauma, my brain started developing differently in my formative years because my brain was always in survival mode. And the impact of ABA to this day, like there's a laundry list other than like everything that complex trauma encompasses. I am pretty much prompt dependent into adulthood, which luckily my friends and my spouse are all very gracious about. I freeze. I can't do things on my own because of this. Even like the other night, like I had this very long conversation with my spouse. I was like, is it okay for me to eat dinner now? And he's like, you shouldn't be asking that 10 years into our relationship. And I said to them, like, it's not a reflection on you. Like, when I was a child, I had food taken away or given to me as a response, and or given to me as a reward, and building off of the reward, food as a reward, punishment. Verbal vocal speech was starved out of me as a child. It wasn't just here's a Skittle, it was you're not eating until you ask for your food. I have had borderline eating disorders on and off my entire life, and it's not like I want to be skinny or I have these body ideas. I'm a CrossFit athlete. I have a six-pack, I'm on my way. I definitely have visible abs. It's not about body ideals. It's about not seeing myself as productive enough to have earned my food, because food was used as a motivator for me in my youth. And that's like body ideals, I feel like, and, media messages and, the demographics that do live with anorexia or bulimia or binge eating disorder, all of these sort of EDs. I don't want to say that it's easier to remedy, but there's more out there to remedy. There's more resources, whereas mine stems from having food connected to productivity and food connected to neurotypical traits from the second I was identified as an autist. I can't decouple that in my brain. I can't just pull out the fuse and be like, well, beauty standards are dumb and I'm gonna eat what I want to eat. Like, no, that's burned into my brain. That, and especially it's harder with unmasking because food is connected to acting neurotypical in my brain. I also have differences in interoception, so it's like my body doesn't tell me I'm hungry until it's almost too late anyways.
Can I ask how old you are?
I'm 31 years old.
You're 31, yeah. So that, like you say, that's really gone into your adulthood, the things Absolutely. That you were put through.
Oh my God, yes. There are times, I still wake up with the smell of my own burning flesh in my nostrils. Like, I apologize if I breathe too loudly. It's so discouraging, because ABA taught me, whether they were intending to or not, that regardless of what I do, the way I'm existing is wrong. ABA taught me that the way I move my body, I'm allowed to move my body and speak, is predicated on what others think of it. And I get big friggin' trigger warning here. I was molested by a family member in my youth for 7 years, and starting when I was 6 years old, and not once did I ever question that was not normal. Not once did I ever say when this person was raping me, no, stop, don't, because it is very much linked to ABA. So much of my ABA was, hand over hand, we're going to do this, or holding me still, or putting things on or in me that I found unpleasant. So when, he came to my room at night, my first thought was not, this is wrong. My first thought was, I need to have quiet hands or I won't be allowed to eat lunch. I need to have quiet hands or I won't be able to sit with my friends. I need to have quiet hands or I won't be allowed to talk about Star Wars. This is what you are subjecting your children to when you teach them that their body does not belong to them, when you put them through the pain and make them endure things that they don't want to, and teach them that they need to please neurotypical adults at all costs. This is where it's going. This isn't me trying to use scare tactics, and I know that personal anecdotes are not science. That being said, this is what happens.
And that being said, okay, this is a personal anecdote, but how many personal anecdotes do we as a society or societies have to listen to before we, and when I say we, obviously not us, accept that these approaches that are inherently about removing the autonomy and allowing the authenticity of an autistic person, that how many of those stories do we need to hear before people realize it's wrong? And obviously that's a really distressing instance where you say about the sexual abuse. Okay, just because your child goes through ABA and doesn't experience, for instance, sexual abuse, it's not to say that they're not going to grow up and still not feel their own, not have the ability to respect their own autonomy because they've had it removed.
Right.
And put in those boundaries and things like that is just wholly, I don't even have words, if I'm honest.
Right.
We can't be doing that to children. We can't be, one, telling them that they're wrong, and then completely also taking away every element of their humanity, their autistic humanity,
Sure.
by removing their autonomy and telling them everything else these adults do is fine.
Right.
That's not.
Right. And I mean, non-compliance is a social skill. And like the thing is, I was speaking more on what you said about, you know, how many personal anecdotes do we need? And I've said this before for stuff with Awesome training I've done, which is another autism organization out of Ireland. One of the critiques I see a lot on my page, or, you know, some of the labor I do, and, you know, that you don't see in my DMs, it's like, well, you know, you just had one bad therapist. First of all, I was in ABA for 12 years. I had many therapists for many years. Okay, let's follow that line of thought and pretend that ABA isn't abuse, which, to be clear, it is. I'm just humoring this line of thought. So let's follow that thread. There are hundreds of thousands of autistics speaking out about their ABA trauma, hundreds of thousands of us about, you know, having the same story I do about, you know, child molestation and prompt dependence into adulthood and eating disorders and not knowing where you begin and the mask ends. There are hundreds of thousands of those stories out there. That means if these are all just one bad experience, there are hundreds of thousands of supposedly bad, supposedly mistrained therapists, ABA therapists out there. Hundreds of thousands of therapists traumatizing hundreds of thousands of autistics. What does that say about the ABA industry as a whole, then, about its ethics, about what they do to therapists who do traumatize their clients, that they're able to continue practicing? What does that say about regulation of the industry if there are this many bad or mistrained people supposedly misapplying the distinction? What is that? That's also not an argument in favor of it. Because,
and even if it were the case, so the comment that I've posted, tagged there, which is some people may have had positive experiences, but they can't use those experiences to negate stories like this. Absolutely. But more importantly, even the idea of positive experiences, they still, in the long term, are not positive. They are still telling that person that they are not, as they were born, correct, that they weren't, that there's still something wrong with them. So even if it's the least damaging thing that can come out of ABA is that autistic person appears less autistic. That's really the goal, surely, that the autistic person appears less autistic.
right,
being autistic, though.
and as a child, you're not able to articulate that. So, like, I had my parents ask me, "Oh, do you like this new therapist?" I would say, "Yes, this new therapist lets me talk about Star Wars. This new therapist lets me flap my hands. This new therapist gives me hug and praise." But all of those things were used as motivators to me. Sure, you can talk about Star Wars after an hour of touch blue, touch nose, say umbrella, after an hour of me playing the correct way, after an hour of me trying to make verbal vocal speech. I did not realize at the time that they were being used as motivators for me. I was just like, wow, I get to talk about Star Wars for 5 whole minutes uninterrupted on this timer at the end of the day. And one of the things in ABA is, you take preferred activities. So watching or talking about Star Wars, for me as a child, that was one of my spins, my special interests. Or flapping your hands, these are used as rewards, like eating like Eggo waffles were the same food when I was a kid. Oh yeah, I get to eat waffles with this therapist. Children don't have the ability to articulate, I feel like I'm being manipulated, or it's just you don't realize it at the time that that's what was going on. So of course I'm going to say I liked it because I'm getting to do preferred things. The fact that they're being used to manipulate me was entirely lost on me at the time, or even if I did know, and there were times I knew, I was just happy to be able to do it because it feels like you're starving when you don't get to engage with your special interest, or all these, or move your body the way you need to move your body. Like, does that make sense the way I'm explaining that?
Yeah. And obviously coming back to that person's comment, which they're agreeing with us. It's not,
right.
I'm not knocking what they were saying, but I just think anything that's predicated on us not being us is a problem.
Right.
I want to move on to as well, because we've got a little bit left and I'm conscious of the time, so I don't know how much more time you might have.
Oh, I am done with work for the day, so
okay.
Able to stay as long as you need me.
Yeah, and I have no idea what's happening with my dinner. I'm assuming there might be some dinner coming at some point. I don't know.
That's me every night. It's like, oh, being an adult is like defined by like I'm supposed to think about what I want to eat every night and then make it every night.
Although we've got there's the same sorts of meals that we'll have, not the same day every week, but there's a very small repertoire of food that we will.
Also, it's like tuna melts, grilled cheese, like
this. Yep. So my next question is, do you still speak to your parents?
No.
Given that they put you through ABA?
I speak to my parents as little as possible. I speak to my family of origin as little as possible, honestly. I have tried to entirely disentangle myself from my family, but I grew up with what we would call in the self-advocacy movement, martyr parents or autism warrior parents. They made my neurology the center of their identity. And it wasn't just that they put me through ABA. And I've tried at times to talk to them to say, you traumatized me in this way. I have, because I know that neurotypicals love hints. Hint at, I'm doing this speaking engagement about how ABA is traumatic and abuse, and she sent me links about how ABA is the best thing in the world and how parents are doing the best they can.
But ultimately, that wasn't your experience anyway. So what
right.
good is it to send you? Well, look at these people who say it's great. That's not your experience, so it's kind of
right. My parents don't know anything about my life. They very much adhere to pathology paradigms, and that autism is a deficit model and blah, blah, blah. I grew up hearing all the things I couldn't do because I was autistic. And, my mother would I'd hear her in the next room crying and that I would never, get married. I would never go to university. I would do all of these things that I would never do because I'm autistic. All of these things that I have done, not despite of my autism, but because of my autism. Because make no mistake, my autism is fucking beautiful. And if other people have a problem with that, that's not a reflection on me. If I make other people uncomfortable by being myself and not hurting anybody, they're welcome to not be around me. But that's not enough reason for me to tone myself down.
Can I ask, given all of that, given that you were taught that you have a pathology, the deficit model, all that kind of thing. What we didn't discuss this, but what kind of led you then to really moving away from that and obviously embracing the neurodiversity paradigm, being an advocate?
Cutting off my parents.
It was okay.
It was very much cutting off my parents. It was very much finding the work of other autistic people, because I didn't ever really have a problem with the way I view the world, with the way I move my body, with the way autism has me do things. I didn't have a problem with the way my mode existed, but like, even so, I lived with my parents far too long into adulthood, or other members of my family, just because I didn't think I would ever be able to, find a spouse or ever be able to, exist on my own, because these were not things that talked to me. So at one point I was homeless for a period of time because I left. I said I could not take this anymore. And I went and I was rather be homeless and, couch surf and squat over staying where I was with my family, with, a relative that raped me every night, and parents who would be like, if I flapped my hands happily, like, stop that, and smack my hands. So as soon as I wasn't there anymore, I was like, maybe I'm not that terrible. To this day, I have trouble conceptualizing that people can truly like me the way I am.
And this isn't in that cheesy way. Like, I've met you a couple of times. I say that obviously online, but again, you're just another autistic person that I can get on with, that I can be like, I like this person. This person is, it's very rare. Yes, there will be autistic people who I just don't get on with, and that's just fine, because, with equality, some of us are allowed to be a-holes as well. Yes. We're not all going to be these bright, shiny people, but the majority of people I meet who are autistic, I'm just like, I get that person. It's comfortable. It's much more comfortable when you can communicate or understand that other person's communication.
Right. And it's funny because, like, my hands, even into adulthood, would be smacked, or I'd be told, like, quiet hands or whatever. But, like, the other day I talked about this on a podcast for a local gym that's geared towards neurodiverse individuals. Like, I flap everywhere I go. There's actually a person in my life who calls me Little Bird because of my flappy hands, and it's super cute. But I was at CrossFit the other day, as I am every day because it's one of my special interests. And the coach, who I also consider my friend, was like, "Oh, JayJay, I don't think I've ever noticed is your neutral flap and in and out motion." And I was like, "Yeah," and he mimicked it, and I was like, "Oh, like, keep doing that. Like, I don't think you realize how great flapping is." And I looked around, and behind me, and everybody in the gym is doing my flap. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of great, isn't it? And, like, had I still talked with my parents, or still, was with them, that never would have happened. And I was like, wow, people do accept me the way that I am, and people do like me. Like, there are times I've been talking with people and they'll say something positive about me, and I'll be like, please don't make fun of me. And they're like, what the actual fuck? Like, that's a compliment. I'm not making fun of you. I'm like, seems sus.
And that is one of the most beautiful things. It's thanks to, I'll have to introduce everyone, but you as well at some point, to Annette, because Annette's been so caught up with her PhD and things, and obviously being autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxic with attention differences means that she really struggles sometimes with trying to do things in academia and what have you, but she is the reason. She's one of the sort of first introductions to an autistic advocate that I had, and I was lucky enough, she was on my campus, and actually I met her in person, and she became my friend, and all this kind of thing. And a lot of what she did and taught me, and then we worked together to teach other autistic people who were on the campus, was how to be autistic.
Right.
And it sounds Yeah, and it sounds strange. So it's what you're just saying, like sharing in your stims and things like that. And so one of my memes that I've used for a few years now, which is we treat autism, in quotation marks, treat, by teaching them how to be autistic. And I don't mean as in we're making them inauthentic to themselves. What I mean is we're reminding them of the things that they've been stopped from doing. So, you know, non-harmful stims that they would have done as children that were squashed, and then some of them ended up with harmful stims or just end up not moving at all. And human beings do not move at all. And so it actually makes you more obviously autistic when you're just completely still. And so her work has been amazing to be a part of as well, and the workshops and things that she would do. But it's like you say, we would do like stim circles and share and go, oh, I like that one that you do. That's really nice. I think I might try and start incorporating that into my regulation and things like this, because I would just have my own natural ones, and sharing is just beautiful.
And I mean, I've also always been like, again, this is something that like maybe I don't being identified earlier, whatever, but like I have an inability to mask. My mask, you know, I would try, but I've never been able to pass as neurotypical. People always knew something was off, even when I mask. Like I feel like I come across as more autistic when I mask or try to. I've never been good at it anyways. So there's something to be said for that. Like I would love to do like either like a live or you know, some sort of event where I just go through my unmasking process, because I've outlined step by step what I've done to get rid of the mask and identify what is the mask and what is actually me, and how to let the rest of me out. And it's hard, man, especially when, like, again, the CPTSD, the trauma from ABA, it's hard to show the world your real, authentic, autistic self, because you are going to get rejected. But, like, would you rather be rejected and authentic, or accepted for and only at your most inauthentic? I would rather have a small circle of people who truly appreciate me for what I am and what I will always be, than a large group of people that I need to exhaust myself to be around.
And that's, again, what I argue with the support program that me and Annette started a few years ago, which is very structured, is I say all the time, I really don't think it's about the education. We talk about what is autism from autistic experience, not, you know, the pathology idea. We do that and then tell them to put that in the bin. And then we say, but this is autistic experience. This is autistic culture. This is the community. This is how you can connect with people, all that kind of thing. And I don't think it's any of that real. It's not the education part. It's just allowing them, even if it's for just 2 hours a week, because that's how long the program would be every week for 8 weeks. It's just allowing them 2 hours a week where they feel completely safe to be their authentic self. And if anything, there'll be me going, oh, what's that thing you're doing? Oh, I like that. You know, which they've not necessarily heard before. And it's me genuinely, because I don't lie. I can't, I'm really poor at it.
I can't lie.
Yeah, I'm terrible. If people would just tell if I was lying. You know, it's that authentic, oh, I like that about you. And the thing that I like about you is a very autistic thing.
Absolutely.
And actually, the validation of just being liked for yourself, which is also coming right back to the whole problem with ABA, is you are not being liked for being yourself. So that really is, that's the most important thing, I think, for any autistic at any age, is to, I've gone off on a weird tangent in my head.
No. It's all very relevant.
So again, because we're going to play a little bit of devil's advocate, but we're getting right to the end, I think, because I think you've kind of answered a couple of the other questions that I had. So this one, which is, I think, an interesting one. So do people say ABA helped you to speak and use mouth words? So remembering JayJay said that they don't or didn't use mouth words really until you were around 11. That's a lot of ABA. and you didn't get to use mouth words until you were 11, so it didn't really do potentially what they wanted to, or at least not in a time frame that maybe your parents would have liked. So if, or do people ever say to you then, well, ABA helped you to, you know, use mouth words? So what would you say to that?
I would say that at what cost? I mean, what I would like to say to them and what I would say to them are very different things.
The PG version of what you would say to them.
So this actually played out when I was a teacher. I think this was part of what got me ousted when I was teaching kindergarten and first grade. There was an ABA, like the behavior analysis or whatever, and I was trying to find a connection with them, try to confide in them. Oh, I was an ABA for a really long time, but one, they were like, look, it did wonders for you, and I didn't know, and I outlined that all of the trauma or whatever, and they were like, well, it worked. If you need to starve a child to get words out of them, you're not helping. At what cost? I like
this. It was at what cost? Mic drop. Yeah. Thanks, Bailey.
That being said, like, there are a lot. So even to this day, verbal vocal speech takes a lot out of me. It's a lot of, again, and this is like non-autistic people think of verbal vocal speech as a non-activity, something that doesn't take up time and energy and spoons, but I need to think about moving my mouth and my tongue and my vocal cords in all these very specific ways to create all of these illocutionary, all of these speech sounds. As someone with dyspraxia, as movement and motor differences, it's very hard for me. And one thing I've related it to before, again, because everything goes back to my special interests, which I carry behind me like a Trojan horse and will drag into casual conversation that has nothing to do with it. I do CrossFit for an hour a day, every day. I would do it for much more. But at CrossFit, I can lift mass amounts of weight over my head all the time. But so for like ollie lifting, people who do ollie lifting, people who do CrossFit lift these mass amounts of weights over their head, and it's tiring, right? Like, it's exhausting. And when we hear that someone does ollie lifting or Olympic lifting or CrossFit or runs marathons or something, we don't say, well, I need you to run a marathon right now to prove that you have the ability to, or I need you to lift 200 pounds over your head right now and keep it there at all points in time, because you can. We know that this sort of training and these sort of activities are done in short bursts for specific purposes, and that to ask someone to do them all the time would be detrimental. But I get questions on my page all the time. I know that my son can use verbal vocal speech. Why doesn't he? Why is it wrong for me to want him to do it all the time? Like, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And again, this is something that goes back to CrossFit. Just because you can RX the workout doesn't mean that you
That's such a great analogy, though. That's such a useful way, and hopefully people can pick up on that in the comments. If you have that where people say that to you, or like you say, just because somebody can doesn't mean that they should. And I think back to that whole point of the mic drop, that at what cost? Obviously you can't change what happened, but it might be a different case that you wouldn't be a traumatized speaking, as in using mouth words, autistic adult. You might be an untraumatized or non-traumatized, but non-speaking adult.
Yeah, exactly.
That is still an absolutely valid life experience, to be a non-speaking autistic person who's not traumatized. Surely is preferable to traumatizing somebody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, the fact of the matter is speech can be exhausting. And would you rather someone who speaks and is exhausted all of the time and in pain all of the time and may still not even be communicating effectively? Or would you have someone who doesn't speak, who has the cognitive bandwidth to do things that they enjoy and to exist joyfully in the world? They just don't speak, or don't speak a lot.
Or you would have other modes of communication. They could have learnt sign with you. They could have learnt other, alternate and augmentative modes of communication. This fascination or this obsession with having to use mouth words is frustrating. I mean, I don't experience situational mutism. So for those in the comments, it's sometimes referred to as selective mutism, which makes it sound like it's a choice and it's conscious. So we tend to talk about it as situational because it usually depends on the situation the person's in. So I don't experience that, because that typically is because the person's feeling very anxious in social interaction, which is very valid. But I do sometimes lose my ability to use mouth words, or it's an extreme effort to do it when I'm really, really burnt out, for instance. And another university that I do essay marking for, they changed over the lockdown period their modes of feedback to students. And they said, it's university wide, we're only giving audio recorded feedback, no typed feedback whatsoever. It will save you time. Mm-hmm. And I emailed back and said, this will disable me. I am disabled, and this will disadvantage me. It will also disadvantage my students, because sometimes I can use mouth words and be quite articulate and articulate myself, and sometimes I can't, or if I do, it's very disjointed, or I can't get the right word. Like the words are here, but they can't come here.
Right.
Kind of thing. And so why disadvantage me and my poor students when I could quite easily, because I can still type usually in those periods and things like this. So they came back and, oh no, I'm really sorry, it's a university-wide policy. And I was kind of like, okay, well, this is, will have other disabled staff members. I can't be the only one. And I won't be marking for you. And I think they realised that could be a lawsuit. So they came back and said, no, you are able now to be the only staff member who will be using written feedback still.
Good for you.
And
that's like, I do experience situational mutism, and you said something, it's like the words are up here, they just can't come out. And for me, that's exactly what happened. If there was like a tube from my brain to my mouth, like a wire connecting my brain and my mouth, it's like in the situational mutism, it's that disappears. I can, when I'm situationally mute, whether it's due to stress or burnout or nerves in a social situation, I can think of all the words I want to say, and like I don't have pictures in my brain, so when I think, I see like typed words. There's still that, and I'm still able to make locutionary utterances. I'm still able to make sounds out of my mouth. It's not like my mouth isn't working and it's silent, but it's the connection between my brain and my mouth and getting them there effectively that feels like it disappears. It's an inability. It's not, I don't want to use speech. I would do anything at this point to be able to communicate what I'm feeling, but the tube that gets in there is it's disappeared, or the wire has short circuited.
And it is an interesting phenomenon, and it's definitely happening every time I say phenomenon in my head. I can't help it. It's so annoying. Like, it's just,
I never could not experience that now.
It's ingrained. It's so frustrating. But it is a fascinating phenomenon, and it's definitely, I feel in the past because I would have always considered myself not to experience that. But I think what it was is I would just really push through that. So it isn't the case that I can't talk at all. For instance, I can get out some nonsense sentence, or it'll take me much, much longer to get out that sentence. So I feel that I'm allowing myself more now that I know I'm autistic. and that I didn't mask that much either. Like you said yourself, it's actually quite hard, but I definitely am allowing myself to do more of my authentic autistic things and behaviours in the last few years. So I think it's more the case, it's happening more often now that I will not be able to use mouth words, or I'm struggling to use mouth words, but just not try to push through it. Does that make sense? So like in the past, I would have just pushed through it and it would have just been garbled nonsense maybe. Whereas now I'm kind of like, no, Chloe, your brain is telling you you're too tired. You can't even form sentences anymore. I'm getting that way now. Don't keep trying to push through it. So like you said, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
And it's funny, like neurotypicals have this hyperfixation on texting until it's like, I'm situationally mute, I'm just going to text you, and then it's like, how dare you? Kind of.
I was back to the argument as well about eye contact and things like that, and it's like, you don't need eye contact for communication. What happens when you're on the phone?
Exactly. There are entire cultures that consider eye contact to be rude.
Exactly. Although I said, what happens when you're on the phone? I'm like, I'm never on the phone.
Right, exactly. Like I don't talk on the phone. I don't know when it's my turn to talk. I just end up talking over.
Phones are evil.
It's terrible. I hate it. I get such anxiety. I need to psych myself up for like a day and a half to like make it.
I don't mind so much if I'm the one making the phone call and it's to another autistic person.
Usually well, then that's different.
It's very different. But I mean, we had a talk quite a while back, which was with Dr. Mary Doherty, and hers was on the barriers to healthcare for autistic people. One of the biggest barriers that she found is using the telephone.
Absolutely, I agree.
It will mean that we will get to really quite late stages of things like cancer because of the barrier of using the telephone.
Yep.
And in this day and age, they should have email and text service.
They should, because I'm absolutely that person. Like I have a tooth rotting out of my head currently that I just haven't been able to go to because the dentist's office is a terrible, horrible place. I know that they're there to help me, but the lights are so bright and there's so many people and they're touching me, and like I would just rather let the infection from my tooth go into my heart and die than go to the dentist's office. I'm being hyperbolic, obviously, but
there's me being literal. I'm like, I'm just taking you seriously. It's like, okay.
Maybe not obviously, but I'm definitely being hyperbolic. So my spouse had a tooth infection within like the first 2 years of us meeting each other. And at the time I thought they were neurotypical. They're not. And they're just accepting the fact that they're autistic now. But his tooth started, so they had braces when they were a child, and like the dentist had ground out the glue that the braces were on when they got taken off, but went too far and that ground out all the enamel, and just like they had the barriers you were talking about, talking on the phone, go into the office, and they didn't have the neurodiversity lexicon to speak about these differences, but like it got to the point, like his fear of the dentist, like it like the infection went into his bloodstream, the nerves in his face started damaging it, or their face started being damaged, and it turned into like a whole body like infection. It was awful. They nearly died because of these barriers. And like at age 34, they have a full set of dentures, and if we just made life easier for autistics, that wouldn't happen.
Exactly. I'm back to my questions again. Some form of structure, sort of. I think this one will be quite quick. I think it's quite obvious. The comparisons between gay conversion therapy and ABA.
Oh boy. So Ivar Lovas, who is the pioneer of ABA to make individuals indistinguishable from their peers, also pioneered queer conversion therapy. Using admittedly the same and admittedly less harsh methods than applied behavior analysis. And the original, just like ABA, the original let's say, victim of the sissy boy experiment, which is what Ivar Lovaas called gay conversion therapy at that time. His words, not mine. Committed suicide around age 34, I believe it is, which is incidentally just about the life expectancy of adult autistics, between like 34 and like 50 something. Died by suicide because of the treatment he underwent that told him that his mode of existence was fundamentally incorrect and needed to be correct. In the developed world, or I use the term developed world loosely as someone who lives in the United States. In the developed world, most developed countries, queer conversion therapy is illegal. It's a crime. Because we understand one's sexual orientation to be innate. It is part of someone's identity and existence that we cannot change, regardless of how many rewards and punishments were used, regardless of whether we electrocute them into submission or not. The fact that ABA is still legal, and the fact that these methods are still used in ABA, rewards, punishments, to fundamentally alter who someone is, or at least try to, is egregious and unacceptable, because the person who created both that, I hesitate to call them disciplines, they're the same thing, essentially. Why is it okay to be still using them as autistic? So like, paradigms can change, because we used to view queerness through a pathology paradigm as well, and now we don't. We can get there with autism. We used to think the world was flat. Now we don't. We used to think autism was a pathology. We can get to a point where we don't, but using ABA is not the way.
And this is what I've been. I mean, I wrote the chapter, I think maybe 2 years ago, but I don't think the book's actually being released until next year. Which is the Handbook of Critical Autism Studies. And towards the end, I do talk about, I want us to get to a point where we really have completely depathologized autistic experience, including those of us who are incredibly disabled by the environment. So those who really do have quite high support needs, we still need to depathologize them, because
yes, absolutely.
The narrative around them, the people around them, if they have that more balanced perspective of them than just seeing them as deficit, will improve their well-being, even if they can't use mouth words to communicate that with you. Doesn't mean that perspective and love around them won't impact them positively. But my point being, we need to get to that point of completely depathologizing autistic experience in the same way, although not everywhere across the globe, of depathologizing queer experience. Mm-hmm. Anybody within the LGBTQ community, to get to that point where autistic people, we are understood in the way that you understand queer people. You are born and you are gay, bi, trans, whatever it is. We've hopefully, I know there's still problems, but we have got to that point that we understand it's not this pathology.
Right.
We need to have that for autistic experience to be understood as it is just a different way of experiencing the world.
That can't be changed. It's a different way of experiencing the world that we didn't choose and we didn't change. Speaking as someone who is, various flavors of queer and autistic as well. And I see that a lot, that my gender and my sexual orientation are often used by parents or other people in the autism industry to be like, well, you can't really be autistic, or you can't really be transmasculine because you're autistic, or you can't be autistic because you're transmasculine and you're bisexual or whatever. It's like, actually 70-ish% of autists are part of the LGBTQIA plus community anyways, so joke's on you, asshole. Yep.
And like we said, I don't even know if it was when we were on the live or if it was just before, and I was explaining that I'm neuroqueer, i.e. I have a queer neurology because I am autistic, and while I consider myself cis and straight, and I said relatively speaking, because what does that even really mean anymore? But I consider myself cis straight, but because of my neurology being queer, it queers my gender expression.
Yes.
Because I shave my head. I have to shave my head because the sensory differences relating to being autistic, which means in certain societies, I do not come across as feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm queering my gender by having my queer neurology.
And I feel like autistic gender expression, and like maybe this is like a topic for another day, but like autistic gender expression, especially autistic women, like to be clear, I don't consider myself to be a woman. I was definitely born in a body that has femininity read into it, but that's not who I am. Have trouble being seen by society as women. Like this goes back to neuroqueerness because of the sensory differences. Like, what is femininity but a sense of it's an arbitrary social category anyways. It's a set of unspoken rules that you're supposed to adhere to in order to be seen by others as feminine, regardless of the way you fundamentally understand yourself. And a lot of those ways of expressing femininity are uncomfortable, not just to autistics, but like neurotypical, AFAB and femme presenting people, that it's like there's a saying, I don't know if it's over there as well, but like in the United States, like I tried to go to beauty school for a while just for shits and giggles, and they would always say, oh well, beauty is pain, like, and I feel like that's another reason, like, oh, women can't be autistic, they say, and also autistic women aren't really seen as women, or are seen as have either queerness or asexuality read onto them, because I know that one of the reasons I prefer dressing in ways that are often seen as masculine, other than the way my internal sense of self, is also sensory differences. I cannot stand tight clothing. I cannot stand having like my legs exposed, so I don't wear dresses or skirts. I don't like having, like, I have like the lip makeup I'm wearing right now. The only reason I'm able to wear it is because it doesn't rub off, but I feel it there. It's like,
yeah. And I'm constantly, I think I noticed some comments. I'm afraid there's been so many comments, I've missed a lot of them. Lovely commenters in the comment section. But yeah, somebody was talking about lips and that they notice their lips all the time. And I'm the same. I've got so many lip balms, and I know to some extent it's one of those things of the more you use it, the more you need it kind of thing. But then that means I go off and research and go, okay, well, I won't use that type because that actually, so lots of lip balms, going off on a really weird specialization of interest of mine, which is that some lip balms, or a lot of lip balms, they moisturize by drawing your own moisture from your body, and then it dries, which means you just keep reapplying. So it's like, say it again, sorry?
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. But
exactly.
It's one of those things that's like now that you say it, it's so obvious to me that like it just never would have occurred to me because it's so obvious.
But I did my research, and if you put on like a very moisturizing balm, and then maybe like I use beeswax ones to like seal it on and things like that. Why have I gone off on this weird tangent? But yeah, being really aware of like makeup and like the feel of it and things like this. So I know so many female presenting autistics who just don't like makeup because of the sensation.
Right.
But they do consider themselves feminine, right? And so it's their neurology, again, queering their gender as well.
And it's not even
I just think we're fascinating.
Other people's perceptions of their gender, right? Because gender is what other people read onto you, not how you experience them, right? And like, to be clear, when I say it's what other people read onto you, not what you experience yourself as, is what I mean, that your internal sense of self can differ, and people will still read things into you, or onto you, rather.
Yeah. And I know, I mean, I'm kind of slightly different to you in the sense of, because you say you don't like things being tight and what have you, and I'm absolutely with you there. Like bras are evil. But I'm very much, in the sense I like a dress for that reason. So, not so much because I'm at home all the time now, but when I'm out and about, dresses are like my armor as well, because I like that sort of flowy feeling that you're not being...
I wear like bell-bottom jeans for the same reason, because I can't have like wind on my legs is weird. Like I don't wear shorts. I mean, unless I'm at the gym, but it's like they make a swoosh swoosh and they flow and they're like it's so hard to find like actual bell bottoms too. So there's an extra struggle there.
Hey, right, another question. Well, I think we're right at the bottom now. So try not to go on too long with this one. I said that about the one we just had, and we still went on for. This is the way conversation goes. If this is the problem I have with running and doing things on Aucademy, is that they're always conversations I want to have, and then just get stuck in them, and you're just there. You know, if this was, you know, me and a non-autistic person talking about whatever it is, we always go back to the weather. That's kind of like the autistic idea of what non-autistic people talk about.
That's true.
But it's a completely different thing. I will sit here for hours with somebody if we're talking about, you know, our dedicated interests and what have you. But that's a problem because Louis just messaged me going, dinner? And I'm like, yes. Because it's, yes, so for us it's
my husband keeps like, or my spouse rather keeps on walking in and they're being like, you haven't eaten today.
Oh, okay.
Like,
right, we've got 2 questions. We've got 2 questions and then we'll be done. I mean, this one I guess is quite good and important. So what is your advice for families to avoid behavioural approaches, and what might be useful to help us to be authentic and supported instead? With a little caveat that this might be a bigger conversation that we said we might have at another point in time.
Oh my goodness, I would love to have that more in depth. But firstly, like, nobody needs therapy just because they're autistic. That being said, there are therapies that can help autistic people exist autistically. Like there's occupational therapy, there's speech therapy, not necessarily to help you use verbal vocal speech, but to program your AAC and help you use your AAC or whatever, and help with receptive or descriptive language. Occupational therapy can help with sensory differences and help finding strategies with proprioceptive and vestibular needs. But nobody needs therapy just because they're autistic. If you're doing things like that, there are, like, I would love to, like, write out a checklist for, like, is your therapy neurodiversity informed? Where it's like, if you're in these therapies to ensure that they're not using, you know, behavioral approaches, there's, like, a checklist I could give out to people for that. But it's like, are they listening to autistic adults? Are they recognizing that autists have neurobiological differences? Are they using terms like deficit treatment, person with autism rather than autistic person? Do they use puzzle pieces in their branding? There are all sorts of little clues, I guess, dog whistle would be a term, that even if they're branding as neurodiversity informed, that you can kind of tease out that they're not. And there's little signs and whatnot to use, like everything I just said. Like, are they using person with autism over autistic? Are they using puzzle pieces in their branding?
Are they coming from basically the culture of autism, which is all deficit? Like you say, it's them, you know, if they can't name a number of fantastic autistic advocates,
right?
You know, that kind of thing. I think, how many autistic people have they had training from? Maybe those kinds of things.
Right.
So
how many autistic people are on your staff even?
Are you autistic yourself? That would be, you know, that's also what we want, which is more autistic therapists for mental health, not for the person being autistic themselves. I did have, I don't know what you think about this. It was quite an interesting comment from a family that I'm supporting, and they're desperately trying to find a neurodivergent, friendly, inclusive therapist for their young person. And they can't find one. And I can't remember, I think they're in Canada. I can't remember where they are exactly, but they had a really interesting potential workaround, and I would like your opinion on this as well. They thought that they might try to find an openly queer therapist. So if they can't find a neurodivergent therapist, because that's what they would actually like.
Right.
They were like, what about, that this was their suggestion to me. what about if we try and find an openly queer therapist for our young person? And I found it quite an interesting potential workaround.
It's definitely interesting. I don't know if it would work in the ways that they think it would, because I feel like, again, this I don't know if we've spoken at all about intersectionality here, but it's like having one marginalized identity doesn't necessarily mean that you don't participate in other forms of oppression. The first thing that comes to my mind is I used to, before COVID at least, I would go to a lot of kink munches and networking events. And the person who held one of the munches I would go to, I came out as autistic to her in conversation because I was flapping or something, and she's like, oh, and she's like, my boys are autistic, and I was like, oh, cool, congratulations, like, because that's my default now, is I default to congratulating neurotypical parents of autistic youth. You are lucky that you have autistic children. They'll teach you a lot. And she's like, oh yeah, and I know that many people are against it, but we do ABA. And I stopped talking to her there. And she wasn't a therapist, but she was openly queer. So your status as a marginalized person or having one or multiple marginalized identities doesn't mean you don't participate in the marginalization of other, marginalized or racialized people. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And like I said to them that it was an interesting premise that, potentially they'd have to look into the person, generally speaking anyway, right. What is their approach and things. I guess it was from their perspective, they were so desperate for some decent, support that wasn't, I guess the way they were seeing it is that they would hopefully potentially be understanding of difference.
Different, yeah, absolutely. But I feel
like you said, what was the statistic for LGBTQ?
I think it's like 70 something. It's 70 something. I don't know which.
So it's a high percentage of crossover, of intersectionality, of LGBTQ being autistic. So there would be the potential that they were, neurodivergent, and they were more prepared to be openly queer than they would be openly autistic. Right. It was an interesting premise. So, but I absolutely understand the caveat. Like you say, that still doesn't necessarily mean that they're a good therapist for an autistic person. So thank you for that particular one. So we definitely need a bigger conversation about, which I think is what we were hoping to do maybe at some point. Was it not? To do
what if not ABA, then what?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
So my final question, which is the same question we have for all our lovely speakers, what is your favourite stim?
Oh, oh goodness. And favorite and most noticeable are definitely not the same thing, because I feel like if you ask someone else what JJ's favorite stim is, they would be like, oh, they're always flapping their hands. But I think listening to profoundly stimmy songs over and over and over again, auditory stimming is just, chef kiss. There's a couple songs that come to mind. Anything with banjo or harmonica is so stimmy to me. There's a song by a new school blues band called Cotton Wing called Find and Kill, and the harmonica is just top tier. And for me, auditory stimming is more about the music itself than the lyrics. Lyrics can absolutely be profoundly stimmy. There's a hip-hop artist called Dessa Darling. She's part of a hip-hop collective called Doom Tree. It's all very, very literary, and so she's a slam poet turned hip-hop artist, so her mastery of the English language and internal rhyme schemes just makes my brain feel like it's carbonated. I love wordplay and echolalia. Again, my background is in linguistics, so just anything involving wordplay is just top tier for me, top tier stuff.
Nice. I do like this question. It's one of my favourite ones that we came up with, because it's just nice hearing people's different, because we got such different sensory profiles, right?
Yeah.
And this is the thing. yes, it's the case that if you've met one autistic, you've met one autistic, but that's problematic in itself because we still share similarity, right? But also I still like to hear the differences as well amongst us. So yeah, I've been sitting here. So I've got this. So Louis is getting rid of loads of like clothes that he can't fit into anymore, or things that he just doesn't like, which is great for me. I like it when we're nearly done, which is lovely when, because I like things to be really quite minimal, and he's not. He's very attention deficits. There's stuff everywhere. So I've been sitting with this thing, which is one of his. He doesn't. Oh, sorry. This literally was the last question.
That's my husband being like, so first of all, your truck's overheating, and second of all, we haven't eaten, so I gotta go.
Okay, right, we're done. Okay. All I was saying was, I've just nicked something that he was going to throw out, which was this kind of thing, and it's very silky. So I've been sitting here just like rubbing the silkiness together.
I love it. Anytime I get something new, I have to put it on my face to experience it in full.
Best way. We've got a few people just saying things that they like as well. Metal music is stimmy, harmonica and banjo.
Oh, metal music is so stimmy. I love metal, like Flesh God Apocalypse and Behemoth, and even like later Cattle Decapitation, like FinTech and Tech Death are particularly stimmy for me.
What was the last one, sorry?
What?
What was the last one, sorry?
FinTech and Tech Death, so like technical death metal, where there's a hyper focus on the technicalities of the music. Nice. Yes, I have to go and figure out what's going on with Puff the Tragic Wagon, which is what I call my Jeep.
Okay, well, yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much. Obviously, difficult topic, but I think just very, very valuable for so many people. And somebody has said that yes, it would be interesting if you make another live to continue the conversation. So I think that will be something we can definitely do more lives. Doesn't have to be on ABA, it could be on other things as well.
Anything. I am available to do this at any point. These are some of my favorite moments, is doing these lives.
I just love having these conversations. Like I say, I can have these all day, and then you wouldn't eat, I wouldn't eat, and there'd be a whole problem. So thank you, lovely, lovely learners, and particularly if you did stick it out for the whole 2 hours and something. Goodness, sorry, partner of JayJay. Sorry, my partner as well. He gets so annoyed with me. Just to be clear to everybody that we are going to start streaming from 7 p.m. British time as of next week. So we have obviously been streaming from 8 p.m, but we are now going to switch, and in the hopes that I might start having dinner a bit earlier than gone 10 o'clock at night. And next week we have Erin Eakins. So this is going to be a nice one. So Erin is going to come on and talk about their book, which is Queerly Autistic, the Ultimate Guide for LGBTQIA plus teens. So just talking about the sorts of things where, because of that intersectionality, so, having sensory sensitivities and being queer and wanting to go to like gay pride and things like that, how difficult that will be as an autistic person.
What a phenomenal thing, though. Like, that sounds great.
Yep, so we've got that next week. So that's going to be lovely as well. Thank you, everyone, so much. I have been Dr. Chloe Farahar with JayJay. Bye, everyone.
See y'all.